Helena, how are you? I hope you are doing well and are ready to talk about some food and politics.
Of course. Yeah, things are good.
Awesome. So, as always, I want to start off with the good vibe. I mean, the double take. Excuse me. Something in the food system that is so odd or maybe not so great that you do a double take. But before that, I want to talk about something else. And I don't know. I know this is a podcast, and most people listen to this podcast. So, but there are some who watch it on YouTube. And one of the things they may or may not notice is that I always wear a food themed t-shirt every
I
time,
can't see
or
your t-shirt.
I'm
What's your
gonna
food theme? Oh, okay,
I'm gonna
okay.
show it right here.
Oh,
See, it says this. My brother brought this back for me. He was in Nepal visiting his daughter, was on a semester abroad, and it says Yak Donald's.
that's really
So
fun.
I just want to, point that out for those of you who are out there watching this, that this is what I do for you. I try to keep an attention to the details. It's not just the subject matter; it's all the things that go into it. That's what we do here at Forked.
I love it.
Great. So the double take. I'm sort of calling it, FoodNet gets a haircut. And FoodNet is the Foodborne Disease Active Surveillance Network. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what that is and why we're talking about it?
Yeah, so we basically learned a couple of days ago that due to funding shortfalls, CDC has significantly scaled back this thing that no one has really ever thought about, FoodNet. But basically, it's 10 states, and CDC and FDA and all the federal agencies, they work together to actively monitor what foodborne illnesses are occurring across the country. And it also helps us actually get a sense of how many people are getting sick nationally. So we use this to actually extrapolate data. It's basically like our report card for how well we're doing or how well we are not doing
Not doing,
with
yeah.
food safety. And so this is this really important system that basically everyone in the food safety world thinks is needed. Like we have a couple of other data systems that help track, they match, they'll match the DNA fingerprints of bacteria across state lines to try to solve outbreaks. Like these data systems are not controversial. Like
Yeah.
industry supports them, public health supports them. And so to see this scaled back, they're specifically scaling it back from 8 pathogens that are actively tracked to 2 is just, I mean, literally no one I talk to thinks this is a good idea. They're like,
So
this is a bad idea.
So I have a couple of reactions to this that I want us to walk through. So one, I think I mean, you should explain this a little bit, what those pathogens are, because
Yeah.
really this is the Jack in the Box department of federal government, correct? It's E. coli that got this going, right?
So yeah, so back, when Clinton was president, and actually I remember this outbreak vividly because I grew up
Me
in the
too.
Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, yeah.
So, well, it was national news, but I actually had a classmate almost die
Oh,
when I
really?
was in second grade. Yep, Frankie.
Frankie
Um,
should not have been eating Jack in the Box in the first place.
okay.
I love fast food, but Jack in the Box is not so good.
So it was awful. Like I remember we were told that Frankie had lost 22 pounds as a
Ooh.
second grader. Like it was really, really bad. And it was a horrible outbreak. Like kids died and were maimed for life. I mean, it was horrible, right? So after that disaster is when we got FoodNet. So the federal government was like, we gotta like get our act together. We need to have better surveillance. We need to get a better handle on this. And we also need to know when policies are working or not. Like we need to have data to look at that. And that's really what FoodNet is for. And so what we're seeing now is funding cuts. The states are really under pressure. CDC is not doling out as much money. And so FoodNet is going down from requiring a suite of pathogens that are tracked actively, like Campylobacter, which is super common, by the way, Cyclospora, which is increasingly common, tied to usually imported produce, even Listeria, which
Listeria
is
is
one we
out.
really worry about. We really worry about that
Yeah.
one. But they're going down to just Salmonella and basically the most dangerous forms of E. coli as the mandatory. Some states may still actively track these, but it really shows a disinvestment and it shows kind of pulling back from this part of the public health system that has been there for decades and that our system has relied on.
So, all right, I want to talk about the bigger picture as it relates to this for a second, but I really, before that, I want to talk about what I think is the most important thing, which is the Rorschach test of the name FoodNet, right? So where you're coming from in this world, I think, depends on whether or not you see it as either when I say FoodNet, do you think Skynet or do you hairnet? Which one is it for you?
Well, when I think of FoodNet, I think I go back to my days. I spent a lot of time as a food safety reporter, right? And
Okay.
so FoodNet, I think of PulseNet actually.
Oh,
PulseNet is a is a another part of the public health system that matches, it will like flag if bacteria match. People get sick and it's the same genetic fingerprint and they'll start connecting those, and that is another really important system we have. It helps uh, all of our federal disease monitoring systems actually figure out if there's outbreaks happening. And like, again, I just want to emphasize how like universally accepted it is that we have basic foodborne illness surveillance. Like it is
yeah.
just not something that's been debated. You can always improve things, you can maybe make them more efficient, but scaling this stuff back just makes no sense. And I think it's interesting. No one ever thinks about FoodNet or PulseNet. We shouldn't have to. It's just one of those pieces of infrastructure, right? That's there.
It's why we have a
And
government.
it actually bothers me to see FoodNet in the
Yeah,
headlines because
yeah.
we there just shouldn't be. I mean, if you talk to any expert, whether they're Republican, Democrat, industry, public health, they just don't see this as something we should be weakening. Yeah.
No. So, all right, let's start to pull back a little bit and sort of try to understand how this all happened. So, the reporting on this, as I understand it, came out almost 2 weeks ago now. I think it was broken at NBC. And it said that they had sort of, CDC, I should say, had quietly scaled back the funding and the mandate for FoodNet. Now, a lot of what we talk about where we get at what's happening in HHS and getting at the MAHA movement, it is not about being quietly scaled back. Around the same time, HHS released a new Maha in action tracker. It's a series of maps showing how well they've done. And what I thought was sort of telling here is around the same time, maybe about the same week that they were cutting the funding for FoodNet, they released, and this is a great press release. It says, HHS launches Maha in action tracker as public health wins sweep the nation. Right. So I think you can always tell something when a politician is doing something quietly. That means they have a pretty good sense that they know you're not going to like it. Right. So the juxtaposing those two together, what do you make of that? I mean, are they aware that that this is a bad thing and they're doing it anyway, or they just don't care about this and so they're just keeping it quiet?
I would guess that Kennedy himself is not aware of the FoodNet stuff. That's fairly in the weeds. And Maha has a real blind spot for foodborne illnesses. So it's just really not, I think it's similar to how Maha always
But wait, why do they have that blind spot? What does that mean?
well, I think it's similar to how they view vaccines and how
Okay.
infectious diseases have gotten way too much attention, and we haven't put enough attention on all these chronic diseases that are tied to food. And I think overall that is maybe a fair criticism, but like, why not both? Right? Like, can we really not walk and chew gum at the same time? I think is like a, a question. So I think they don't see this as a pressing problem, right? But it is a pressing problem when you have an outbreak that is like, hospitalizing people, potentially killing children, and also tanking consumer confidence in a certain product. Like this becomes urgent when it is urgent, and so it's one of those things that the government really can't take. You can't lose focus on this. Like
Yeah.
foodborne illness is one of those things that we're still struggling to like solve as a country. And so, but I just don't think it's a focus of Maha. This is also a crowd that's, some of them really like raw milk, which is uh, the whole food safety establishment's pretty clear in communicating that that is a higher risk food, or, a risky food product, and uh, is often blamed on Campylobacter and E. coli outbreaks, including one right now in Florida, which tragically a mom is now suing the farm because she lost her baby.
Ugh.
She was pregnant. I mean, it's horrible stuff. So,
Right.
yeah.
So, but let's try to put this again, into some context. So one of the things I think is always important to understand. Well, let's think back on a little ancient history. right? And it was, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago now that the CDC director, Susan Monares, was fired by RFK Jr. and then eventually and more formally by the White House itself. And that after and coming out of that, the chief medical officer at CDC resigned, the director of the National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases. I have asthma. That sounds relevant to me. The director of the National Center for Emerging and Zoonotic Infectious Diseases. That too sounds pretty important. And the director of the Office of Public Health Data, Surveillance, and Technology. They all resigned in protest. There's always the question, I think, in the Trump administration, we keep coming up to this question where it's like, when is this stuff going to be a problem? Right? Like all this bad stuff is happening, all this chaotic stuff is happening. When are we going to feel the effect, right, of this stuff happening? And is the cutting back of FoodNet, is that going to be a place where we're going to feel the effect? There's a lot of stuff happening.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think with FoodNet we really are going to feel the effect. What it's going to do is weaken like the data that allows us to evaluate the system, right? And so
Right.
that's much more indirect, but over the long term, it does play an important role. Um, with the chaos at CDC, the way I think about it is like nobody cares about CDC until there's a crisis or CDC is not working, and we are now in a place where all the past, not all, but several of the past CDC leaders are actively warning that CDC is being weakened beyond like repair, basically. There's a lot of trust that's being lost now, particularly on vaccines. I mean, we are in a really, really critical juncture for CDC. And what the infectious disease folks are worried about is that come the next crisis, because like there always is something that CDC is dealing with, whether it's Ebola or Zika or COVID-19 or whatever it is, that's when things could really go south if you don't have the infrastructure, the expertise, the like leadership. And we saw that. I mean, there's a lot of criticism of how CDC had major, major missteps during COVID-19, like really significant ones. So it matters, but like it's hard to say right now, like, oh, we all of our lives are affected because of this. Like it is much more, um, I think it's a much more like convoluted impact. Like it's going to affect us at some point, but right now, I think most people will continue on living their lives and they won't really, they won't really
I,
see an impact of this.
I want to make one last point about this, then we should move on. But I mean, even before Monares was fired, right? CDC had lost 3,000 people, something like that, according to
Mhm.
ProPublica, and about 1,000 of those were scientists, and that's all around the same time that she came into office and was actually confirmed in the Senate, but
Mhm.
with Senate, which is controlled by Republicans. And when you look at it, the forward looking progress, what will we see coming at CDC if you fire your own Senate confirmed CDC director 1 month within her tenure? Where are we going to end up? I mean, the Trump administration has only confirmed 125 Senate level people so far. That's compared to, I don't know, I have this written down here. So his first year he had 200. His first year in office, he confirmed 238. Biden had 267. Obama had 383, and Bush Jr. back in the I guess the good old days of putting people into office who were Senate confirmed, he had 403. So is
Wow.
this another thing like the Farm Bill where we're just not going to have it? We're not going to have Senate confirmed people.
We may not at CDC. I mean, one thing that'll be so interesting to see is if they do put someone else up for that job, like there's going to be even more political fighting in the Senate over that person, right? Because um, there is so much anger within uh, s- really the public health community, but also I think even some Republicans about the way Senator Bill Cassidy was sort of the pivotal vote to approve RFK Jr. And almost all of the demands that Kennedy said were basically agreed to at the time have been um, like not kept. And so, there's some disagreement of like Kennedy will say, "Oh, I didn't actually agree to those things. Like I have no idea, but that's what Cassidy said." And so if you were to come to that juncture again with someone else, like just to lead CDC, I think all of that gets brought up again. So I don't I don't know. I don't know if they will quickly put someone else up. We'll see.
Well, we shall see, I guess. Why don't we move on to our next segment? That is forks and knives. Forks and knives is just the basic status quo, the thing that is happening in the food system that is important and makes a difference and really helps you understand what's going on. And for this, I thought, well, one of the things that was interesting, you shared this with me earlier today. The new federal data from the census showed that there was a 1.2 million person drop in immigrant workers since the Trump administration came into power for the second time. And I think, if I remember correctly, looking at the numbers, that's the first time in many, many years that we've seen a net decline in immigrant workers in this country. And this includes both legal and undocumented workers.
Mhm.
And when the reason it's relevant for us is, hey, guess what? A lot of the food system, something like 45% of it, is made up of immigrant workers. So tell me what you make of this, and is this surprising?
Yeah, I think we are really starting to see um, much more of a like distributed impact to the food system, and it's a lot of it's not really loud. So like we're not seeing a lot of headlines about farm raids right now. There've been like a couple, but not a ton of drama. I mean, a month or two ago, there was that big one in Ventura that got a lot of
Yeah.
press coverage, but really since then, it's been a little more quiet. But the fear is so broad among not just undocumented immigrants, but also folks who have legal status, but maybe are still really nervous about getting swept up in an ICE raid or are, worried about getting stopped by ICE. I'm in DC right now. ICE is very, very present here. They are taking people off the street regularly. These are folks who are, these are agents who are wearing masks. And often the neighbors or the people around are like shouting at them, trying to get their badge numbers or their names. I mean, it's like really dramatic, and that is not only scaring folks who work locally, so food delivery drivers, restaurant workers of all types. But it's just creating this like messaging that sends the message nationally to immigrant workers that like you are in a precarious position. You could be swept up in this, and that fear does affect how many people show up for work. I mean, of course it does, right? So,
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, like, this is something that we report on all the time. At Fern, we have a story that just came out about a week ago about JBS and the Greeley
yeah.
meatpacking plant the JBS meatpacking plant in Greeley, Colorado, and how the economy, the food economy, over the course of the last 20 years has shifted somewhat dramatically from one that was very heavily dependent on undocumented workers to one that is very much more heavily dependent in relative terms to on immigrants, refugees, and
Mhm.
asylum seekers.
Mhm.
Now, many of those people who are here in the country legally, they're losing the kinds of legal statuses that they had, whether it was, a lot of them were here on temporary protected status that's being revoked by the Trump administration. And what's, again, hard to reckon with is, what are these companies going to do? What is the food system going to do? So, if you have an economy that was built on undocumented workers and the government cracks down, they then turn to the refugee workers who they believe will be here longer. If those people are not going to be here, and it's still no sign that American born people are going to go back into the meatpacking plants, who's going
Yeah.
to do this stuff? How is the economy going to adjust?
Well, I think it is a really big unanswered question. It's not really one that this administration engages with in a serious way. I mean, you'll hear people say, like I think Stephen Miller will say, Americans are going to do this job. They're like, we're not going to see um, American citizens mass migrate back to farm fields and meatpacking plants. Like that's just not something, and no one who's serious in food and ag like thinks that, right? There's no evidence of that. So it is a big question, and I think when you look at agriculture, there's always this saying, and the saying is you either import your food or you import your labor. And that's how I think about it when you look at like specialty crops and fruits and vegetables, right? Like that really is the choice in many of these cases, right? Like that's just the choice. And I don't know that we are fully reckoning with that as a country, like that is um, kind of where we are. And you are seeing reports of fruits and vegetables that are not being harvested because of labor shortages. And this has been something that's been going on for a long time. We've had labor shortages in farm fields for years and years and years, and this only exacerbates the situation to sort of
Well, I
a
think
new critical level.
that's an interesting point, right? Because you let's say you were a believer in Trump's anti-immigration policies, and you thought that the United States must become self-sufficient again. There needs to be some immigration reform. We can't have people coming over the border in the ways that we have. If you accept that
Hmm.
fact and say that we
Hmm.
have to do something about it, one of the things you could do is change the temporary worker policies. And there's
Yeah,
been to my knowledge,
that's fraud. Yeah,
no movement by the Trump administration towards expanding H-2A and H-2B visa programs, which are the two main, if I
yeah.
understand it correctly, two main visa programs for ag and meat workers, right? They, this is a solution potentially, but there is nothing happening on this that I know of.
Yeah, I mean, it's the politics on this are just brutal. I mean, Congress probably should have addressed immigration reform a long, long time ago, right? But every time there's an attempt, it just implodes on itself because the politics are so intense. And it's one of those things that everyone acknowledges, like the current system isn't working. Like it's not working for the people who are doing this work. It's not working for businesses who can't really plan or rely on, have a reliable legal workforce. Like it's not good for the economy. That one of the reasons those census figures were so stark is like thinking about the ripple effects on the
Yeah.
economy broadly, right? It just doesn't work, and we're not really moving forward to like a a system that works better. We're just like kind of creating fear, and we're entering the Trumpian sort of vision for this without answering the questions of like how you then actually operate a food and ag system and like what that means.
I
In
think that's a good,
DC, we're actually
yeah,
seeing restaurants like shutter
yeah.
temporarily because
They don't have
um,
workers.
their workers are afraid, or maybe even the owners are like they don't want their workers to all come in and like
Yeah,
be at risk. So like we're seeing, and then they don't want to use their name in the press. Like they'll say, oh, we're shuttering, and they're like, don't put my name in, I don't want to
yeah.
have like. So it's just a very fearful, very dramatic time, and I don't know where all this shakes out, but there's a lot more stress, I think, in the food system than folks realize.
Well, all right. I mean, I think that Trumpian vision, that's an important thing to think about, because there seems to be, if it's even possible for there to be less incentive for the government to undertake comprehensive immigration reform than ever before, because
Yes, yeah.
you have what the Republicans always wanted when it comes to things like the farm bill. They cut SNAP, they cut all the things that underpin it, and they never touch the subsidies to the farmers. So there is no reason for any Republican that I can understand of, maybe you can correct me here, for them to do anything about this. They never managed to do it, Democrats or Republicans, you know, dating back what, 20 years, 30 years now, they haven't done anything. But now there's somehow we're into like the negative incentives.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
is not going to happen.
I think that's right. Even when we saw the Trump administration briefly say, "Oh, we're not gonna like go after agriculture as much or even like hospitality." When Trump said that, there was a
Yeah.
huge backlash within like the MAGA base over that. And then the Trump administration was like, "Never mind, we're gonna go after everyone." Basically, I mean, that's basically what happened.
But how
So
come the
there
food
is
companies are not up in arms? How come the big
I think
farmers,
they are
the big
privately. I think they
yeah,
are privately. There's a lot of there is certainly back channeling going on that, but nobody wants to be like waving their arms like, "Hey, we're a company that relies on undocumented labor," or you know what I mean? Like there's a
yeah,
lot of sensitivity there, and
yeah.
also they're also afraid of the MAGA base. So it's a really sensitive issue in like many ways. So
Well, not to toot our own horn, but at Fern, we have a lot of reporting coming out just on this and more to come.
yeah.
So
Yeah, I'm
I
glad
think
you guys are
the
focusing on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, when you talk about the food system, people mean a lot of different things when they talk about the food system. For you and I, when we talk here, a lot of it has to do with policy, that's sort of DC focused, and that makes perfect sense. That's the thing
Mhm.
that's happening right now. Especially, look at our tagline, food politics in the Maha age. We should be talking about it. But the one of the things that drives a lot of our coverage is labor, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's where a lot of things are happening. So why don't we move on to our final segment, which is the good vibes, right? So I think it's an interesting thing here to talk about with good vibes because we want to find some kernel of hope within the sort of somewhat demoralizing discussions that we're having. And this is the fight between the state of Kansas and the federal government, the USDA, over turning over data on who is getting SNAP in Kansas. And I think the only real kernel of, and I want you to explain this for our listeners in a second, but I think really the main kernel of hope here is that there is in fact a Democratic governor in Kansas who is willing to fight with the federal government. That doesn't always seem to be the case. So what are we talking about here?
Well, first of all, the politics in Kansas are so interesting, and really, it is a much more purple state than people realize. From what little I know about their political vibes there. So
Yeah,
yes, they have a Democratic governor, Governor Laura Kelly, and it's interesting because I don't believe Kansas is part of. There's like something like 20 states suing the Trump administration over
yeah.
this demand. So basically, the Trump administration in the spring demanded that states turn over like a really unprecedented level of individual SNAP recipient data. So things like social security numbers, addresses, just the whole shebang, really. And a lot
Well,
of
why is that
states.
problem? Why is that a problem as a
Oh,
Democrat?
so
If
this
you're a
is
Democrat, why
this
do you not like that?
this is a problem because these programs are administered at the state level. So the feds do come in and sort of check accuracy, and they have checks on, how well are these programs being run, but they are not like handling all that data. And there's a lot of regulations around how you hold. I mean, this is sensitive, private, individual data. Um, the Democratic governors are concerned this will be used for ICE enforcement. They are
Right.
concerned that this will be used for different law enforcement purposes or just other kind of maybe breaches into folks' privacy or civil liberties. Like they're really angry about this, and there's actually a court fight over this. Kansas
That's
is
what
not
this
part
gets.
of that court fight, but Kansas, the governor is just straight up refusing to turn over the data, and the USDA just sent a letter basically giving the state 30 days, or they're going to start taking away millions of dollars from the state and federal funding, which would compromise their SNAP program. So
Apparently it's about 40 million that they're threatening to withhold, which, and I just, to go back to the title of this section, which is good vibe, that ain't such a good vibe, right? But do you think that there is well, I guess two questions. One is, should all the states be doing this? Should they all be fighting this, whether they're red or otherwise? Should they be resisting giving this information over to the government? Because maybe this is a byproduct of the Doge era. And remember that guy, Elon Musk? He was so interesting. That's also ancient history, too, right? There was that guy who wanted to get a lot of information from people. And so, one, should everybody be fighting over this? And two, does this have any chance of succeeding?
yeah, I don't have a good sense of where the lawsuit will end up, but I think states fighting back over like federal government wanting to take more data on their like residents. I mean, I can understand that argument. And you can actually make a conservative states' rights argument on that as well. That just like these are state-run programs. Yes, it's federal funding, but like I think they can argue that like the federal government, and they are arguing the federal government doesn't have the authority to ask for this data. But not everyone in Kansas agrees on this. Like the Kansas Speaker of the House, Dan Hawkins, actually said that Kelly was covering up welfare fraud. That's his thing. First of all, SNAP is for groceries. It's not like a cash welfare program. I feel like people get that confused sometimes. He said, quote, "It's been my fear all along that the Kelly cover-up would put the entire SNAP program at risk. And now, sadly, those chickens are coming home to roost." That's what he said. So I think there's some political divisions within Kansas about this, which probably isn't surprising.
Yeah.
But in general, states pushing back against the federal government for any type of policy, like that's pretty run of the mill. Like that's how this country works, right? Like that's the system we have. The states are always trying to get their sovereignty and their and their rights. And then the federal government's always trying to sort of do their thing and push back on that. And I think that's what we'll see play out in the courts. But I think overall, Democrats are worried that this will scare immigrant families, many of whom are mixed status. So
Yeah.
the children might be US citizens, maybe the aunt living at home or different, like adults may have mixed status. One might have a green card, one might be a citizen, one might be undocumented, and then giving that information to the federal government could help them with enforcement. And I think that's really the concern. And so I'm not sure where the lawsuit will end up, but I can see why states are fighting back.
So I want to just ask one last thing before we call it a day. I mean, I was looking at the Maha in Action Tracker press release, and it mentions some of the
Basically
states.
a campaign website. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
So there are 12 states so far that have gotten SNAP waiver approvals from the federal government, and
Those are for restrictions for sales. Yeah. Of
exactly.
like sugary
And
drinks. Yeah.
I think it's interesting to just listen to the states. I'm just going to list them. So there's Arkansas, Florida,
Mhm.
Idaho, Indiana, Iowa, Louisiana, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Texas, Utah, West Virginia. There's kind of a theme there,
Did
sort
you
of a
skip Colorado?
I
No.
did, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And
I was gonna
that's
say I
the one
know that list. Yeah.
that's the outlier, right?
Mhm.
You could call
Another purple
Kansas
state. Another purple.
purplish, right? I mean, first of
Purplish.
all, I don't know that I really think that Kansas is a purple state. That's a pretty darn red state.
There's
But
some split ticket history.
right, they have
There's
they
some
have a they have
split
a
ticket
Democratic governor.
history.
I
Yeah.
agree. So why is Colorado on that list?
Uh because I think Governor Jared Polis is for some of the Maha ideas. He has been pretty clear about that. I think he's actually publicly said, I disagree on vaccines. Although I think he has a kind of nuanced position where he's not as for vaccine mandates, but he's very pro like convincing people that vaccine or, making the public health case for vaccines. So he's not with Maha on vaccines, but he's made some comments that he does agree with some of the other things, some of the food and ag stuff. And so Colorado's an interesting state. I'm also hearing rumblings that there's going to be some other blue states. So we'll see if those actually come to fruition. But this could
Who's
be a
on the rumbling list?
situation.
Wait, who's on? Wait, look, you don't have to. You're not naming any names here, right?
I'm not
So,
going to name any names, but big blue states may be considering this. So we'll
uh,
see if they actually do it. This is such an interesting one because SNAP restrictions they seemed completely infeasible like a year ago. Like it was just not something Democrats weren't on board, Republicans weren't on board, even though like in the past Democrats kind of were on board, whatever. I mean, the food industry, anti-hunger were in lockstep. They fought this tooth and nail. It just wasn't going to happen. And now it's like that ship has sailed. Like it feels like almost any state could now do this
I
because
have
the
to. I have
barn
to.
doors have been
Yeah,
blown wide open. So
I have to say, like the political case for these restrictions is not a bad one, right?
I
The
think it polls well.
Yeah,
I think it probably polls really well,
I know the response is that
depending
this
on how
is
you word it. Yeah.
I know the response is that this doesn't really do anything. It doesn't work. It's
Well, we
anti-poverty.
don't know. We've
Like
never studied it.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that'll be so key as these
yeah.
states roll out that there's actual rigorous assessment. If you block sugary drinks from SNAP, what is the replacement? Does it have a measurable impact on sugar consumption? Does it I mean, they have to measure all of this so you know whether or not this like public policy intervention did anything. So that will be really key. We need to have good data. We don't know whether or not it like works or not. The argument has always been that it wouldn't work, but
Well,
we've never
I
tried
also
it.
want to add. I want to add one thing here, and I got this from Marion Nestle's newsletter.
Food
Which
politics, it's excellent. Everyone should
yes,
read it. Yeah.
So she talked about the restrictions in Louisiana, right? So they have a SNAP soda ban or soda restriction, but the
Mhm.
way they define what a quote unquote soft drink is
Yeah.
pretty interesting because it means high fructose corn syrups are a no, and sugar cane and beets, and sugar is a big product of
I
Louisiana,
was
of
gonna
course.
say, what
Uh,
does Louisiana grow? Yeah.
they grow some sugar cane, right? So they did not exclude sugar cane, but I guess that sort of makes a Mahayan kind of sense because they
I
don't
think
like
beet sugar would also be included. Yeah, right.
yeah.
It's
Are there any
Look,
sodas made with beet sugar right now?
I don't really have a good handle
Yeah.
on what all the sodas are using, but the vast majority of sugary drinks in this country are still made with corn syrup. So,
Yeah.
or high fructose corn syrup, excuse me. So, it's cute, but I think they're getting a lot of criticism about that particular thing because it just doesn't sort of nutritionally make any sense. I don't know that we'll see a lot of states do that. The real, differences between the states so far are, like, do they include candy? Do they also include energy drinks? Or do they,
Yeah.
how do they draw the lines? And every state is doing it a little bit differently, and so, it's gonna create a lot of logistical questions for the states.
Yeah, it's a hard thing, like, I don't like my kids drinking any of those things, not that I completely stop them from doing it because I am powerless to resist them in certain
Yeah,
ways,
how
but,
old are your
uh
kids? I feel like they're gonna buy what they want, yeah.
yeah, I mean, 19, 14, and 13,
Yeah.
and the 14-year-old's gonna be 15 in a couple weeks, so, they're not I strongly discourage the drinking of those drinks. They are not allowed in the house. The energy I hate the energy drinks for
Mhm.
whatever reason. But yeah, that's what I mean by the political case is not that strong because I know that there is a belief that politically nutritionally it doesn't make any difference to get rid of the sugary drinks for people who are on SNAP. But I also know that I don't want my kid drinking that stuff.
Well, I think it's hard to think about, like, where do you draw the line then? Like,
Yeah,
why not desserts? Why
yeah.
not, why not ice cream? Why not, and so I think in that way, it does get a little bit more complicated, but I think one of Kennedy's, like, most common lines he always says is, like, "Anyone should be able to drink these products or eat these products. It's America, but the taxpayer shouldn't be subsidizing them. The
Yeah.
taxpayer shouldn't be buying them." And I think he says that over and over, I think, because it's a line that, like, really works.
Yeah, agree
There's
or
a lot of
disagree.
other things he
Yeah.
says where they're not popular and they are deeply divisive and polarizing, but that is one where I think they're finding, like, real traction with.
Yeah. I mean, agree or disagree. That's pretty good politics. All right. So why don't we leave it there? Why don't we do the thing that we always do at the end of this episode? Is why don't you tell everyone out there about your newsletter, which is pretty darn good, I think, and how they can go find it and read it.
Yeah, you can go to foodfix.co and sign up for the newsletter. It comes out every Friday. It's free, and everyone loves reading Food Fix. It's both wonky and also fun to read. That's the goal.
You should pay for it. Don't do it for
And you
free.
should.
Pay for it. All right.
Yes.
I'll throw in a one last thing and then I'll let you go. Yes, this is a podcast. It is available also on YouTube where you can see our shining faces and my food related t-shirts. And it's the way to find it on YouTube is at Fern News. Helena, thank you as always. You are a great person to talk to about these subjects and every subject. So I appreciate it.
Happy to be here. We'll see you again soon.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.